Mom, I met my twin today. Lisa nearly dropped the plate she was drying. She turned to look at her 10-year-old son, Ethan, standing in the doorway, his face glowing with excitement. She laughed softly. What do you mean, honey? Ethan plopped onto the kitchen stool, swinging his legs. At school. There's this new kid in my class, and, Mom, he looks just like me. Same hair, same face, even the same little mark on my wrist. He stretched out his arm, pointing at the tiny birthmark near his wrist bone. Lisa's smile froze. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She forced a chuckle. Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure he just looks a little like you. No, Mom. It's like looking in a mirror. Ethan's voice was firm. Even the teacher got confused today. She called him Ethan by accident. Lisa set the plate down carefully, wiping her hands on a towel. What's his name? Noah, Ethan said. He's new. I think he's a foster kid. Lisa's heart clenched. Something about this felt off. She walked over, ruffling Ethan's hair. Maybe you've just found a long-lost twin brother, she joked, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her chest. Ethan grinned. Wouldn't that be crazy? Lisa nodded absent-mindedly, but her mind was already elsewhere. That night, she barely slept. She told herself it was nothing. Kids exaggerate. Maybe Noah did look a little like Ethan. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But something inside her refused to settle. Ethan had mentioned the birthmark. Lisa knew that birthmarks weren't usually identical, not in unrelated kids. And not in the exact same place, with the exact same shape. At 3 a.m., Lisa got up and sat by the window, staring out into the dark sky. Memories of the night Ethan was born flooded her mind, the exhaustion, the confusion in the hospital, the blurry figures of nurses coming and going. She had barely held him for the first few hours. Could there have been a mistake? No. That was impossible. Hospitals didn't make those kinds of mistakes. Right? By morning, Lisa had made up her mind. She was going to that school. She needed to see Noah with her own eyes. She needed to know the truth. Lisa parked her car outside Hillside Elementary, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. She had driven this route 100 times, picking Ethan up from school. But today, she wasn't here for that. Today, she was here for him, the boy who looked just like her son. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the main office. The receptionist, a cheerful woman in her 50s, greeted her with a polite smile. Good morning, how can I help you? Lisa cleared her throat. Hi, I'm Lisa Carter. My son, Ethan, told me about a new boy in his class, Noah. I was wondering if I could meet his teacher. The receptionist nodded and made a quick call. Mrs. Thompson will be here in a moment. Lisa's fingers drummed against the counter. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, a tall woman with curly hair and glasses approached with a warm smile. Mrs. Carter. So nice to meet you. Ethan is a wonderful student. Lisa smiled weakly. Thank you. Actually, I came because he mentioned a boy in his class, Noah. Mrs. Thompson's expression changed. She hesitated, then said, yes. I assume Ethan told you about the resemblance? Lisa's stomach twisted. So, it's real? Mrs. Thompson nodded. It's remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. At first, I thought they were related, but Noah is a foster child. He was placed with his guardian a few years ago. Lisa swallowed. Would it be possible for me to see him? Mrs. Thompson hesitated, but then nodded. They're in the cafeteria for recess. You can come with me. Lisa followed her down the hallway, her footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. Her heart pounded in her chest. Then she saw them. Two boys sitting at a table, talking and laughing like they had known each other forever. Ethan. And Noah. Lisa stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. It was like looking at a duplicate of her son. Same bright hazel eyes. Same slightly messy brown hair. Same dimple when they smiled. And then, Lisa's eyes drifted to Noah's wrist. The birthmark. Identical. She felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was something else. Something bigger. A woman sat at the next table, watching the boys. She had sharp eyes and graying hair tied in a bun. Noah's foster mother. Mrs. Thompson led Lisa over. Karen, this is Ethan's mother. She was hoping to meet you. The woman looked up. Her lips tightened. Lisa, is it? Lisa forced a polite smile, though her stomach was churning. Yes. I hope you don't mind me asking, but Ethan came home talking about Noah, and I just had to see for myself. Karen's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Yes. I suppose it is unusual. Lisa glanced at the boys again. Unusual is an understatement. Karen sighed. Look, I know what you're thinking. I've thought it too. Lisa's pulse quickened. You have? Karen nodded. Noah came into my care when he was about 3. They found him at a hospital. No record of his birth parents. Just a baby left behind. Lisa felt the ground shift beneath her feet. A hospital? Before she could speak, the school bell rang, signaling the end of recess. The boys grabbed their trays, still talking animatedly, oblivious to the adults watching them. Lisa turned back to Karen. I don't mean to pry, but, do you know anything else about where he came from? Karen's expression hardened. I don't like to dig into things I can't change. Lisa's heart pounded. There was something Karen wasn't saying. She forced a tight smile. I understand. But, if you ever do want to talk, I'd love to chat. Karen studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. Lisa turned to leave, but she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because deep down, she already knew the truth. Noah wasn't just some look-alike. He was Ethan's brother. And she was going to prove it. Lisa barely remembered the drive home. Her mind was spinning. The way Noah and Ethan looked at each other. The identical birthmarks. The way Karen reacted when she pressed for details. This wasn't just a coincidence. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at an old photo of Ethan as a newborn. His tiny hand curled into a fist, a hospital bracelet wrapped around his fragile wrist. A lump formed in her throat. She remembered the day Ethan was born vividly, how difficult the labor had been, how exhausted she was afterward. She barely held him in those first few hours. The nurses had taken him to check his vitals, and when they finally brought him back, she had been too weak to question anything. Her heart pounded. Had something happened that night? She pulled out her phone and searched for Hillside General Hospital, where Ethan had been born. She scrolled through the staff listings, looking for a familiar name. Then she saw it. Dr. Whitmore. A name from her past. The doctor who had delivered Ethan. She hesitated, then dialed the hospital's number. A receptionist answered. Hillside General, how can I assist you? Lisa took a deep breath. Hi, my name is Lisa Carter. I gave birth at your hospital 10 years ago, and I'm looking for some old records. Can you tell me if Dr. Whitmore still works there? There was a pause. Then the receptionist said, Dr. Whitmore retired years ago, ma'am. But I can connect you to medical records if you'd like. Lisa clenched her fist. Retired. That made things harder. Yes, please. After a long wait, a woman from medical records picked up. We keep birth records for 10 years. What's the name and date of birth? Lisa quickly gave Ethan's details, her heart pounding as she waited. Finally, the woman said, I'm sorry, ma'am, but there seems to be an issue. Some of the records from that night are missing. Lisa's blood ran cold. Missing? She gripped the phone tighter. Missing how? The woman hesitated. There were some discrepancies reported in our maternity ward that night. Some files were never properly archived. Lisa's head swam. Discrepancies? Her fingers trembled as she asked, were there any other babies born that night? Any reports of confusion? There was a long pause. Then the woman lowered her voice. Ma'am, that night, 2 babies were reported missing for a few hours before being found again. The hospital never released a statement about it. It was handled internally. Lisa gasped. She could barely speak. What do you mean, missing? A nurse reported that 2 infants had disappeared from the nursery. They were later returned, and the staff was assured that everything was fine. No parents were notified. Lisa clutched the edge of the table. She felt sick. Had Ethan been one of them? Had Noah? She swallowed hard. Do you have the name of the nurse who reported it? The woman hesitated. I shouldn't be giving out this information, but her name was Margaret Olson. She retired a few years ago. Lisa's breath came in short gasps. This was bigger than she imagined. She had to find Margaret Olson. And she had to find out what really happened the night her son was born. Lisa gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The name Margaret Olson echoed in her mind like a distant drumbeat. She had spent the last few hours scouring online directories, old nursing forums, and even social media. Finally, she had found a possible address, a small house on the outskirts of town. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she knew one thing: Margaret Olson was the key to the truth. Lisa pulled into the driveway of a modest, weathered home. A wind chime clattered against the porch railing. She hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts, then stepped out of the car. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. The door creaked open, revealing a frail-looking woman in her 70s, her eyes sharp despite the lines of age on her face. Yes, the woman said cautiously. Lisa forced a polite smile. Mrs. Olson? My name is Lisa Carter. I was told you used to work at Hillside General Hospital. The woman's face tightened. I haven't worked there in years. Lisa nodded. I know. But I believe you were working the night my son was born. And I think, her voice caught in her throat, I think something happened that night. Something that wasn't recorded properly. Margaret's eyes flickered with something, recognition, hesitation, maybe even guilt. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, moving to close the door. Lisa panicked and put her hand on the doorframe. Please, she pleaded. I know there was a discrepancy in the maternity ward that night. Records missing. 2 babies unaccounted for. Margaret froze. Lisa took a deep breath. I think my son was one of those babies. Silence. Lisa's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Then, Margaret let out a slow breath and pushed the door open wider. Come in. Lisa sat on an old couch, hands folded in her lap, trying to calm the storm raging inside her. Margaret settled into a chair across from her, clasping her fingers together. I shouldn't be telling you this, Margaret started, her voice quiet but firm. I promised I would take this secret to my grave. Lisa swallowed hard. Secret? Margaret sighed. There was a baby mix-up that night. Not just a mix-up, a disappearance. 2 babies went missing for 3 hours. Lisa's stomach dropped. Margaret continued. The hospital director covered it up. Said it would cause too much panic, ruin the hospital's reputation. She shook her head. I never agreed with it. But I was just a nurse. I couldn't fight them. Lisa's mouth went dry. Do you know who took the babies? Margaret hesitated. Then, she nodded. Lisa felt her breath catch. There was a doctor, Margaret said slowly. One of the top pediatricians. He had personal reasons for what he did. And connections high up. He was never punished. Instead, he retired early. Lisa already knew the name before Margaret spoke it. Dr. Whitmore. Lisa's hands trembled. What did he do? Margaret sighed, rubbing her temples. He took 2 newborn boys. No one knew why at first. But then, a few hours later, he returned one of them, claiming it had all been a mistake. Lisa's blood ran cold. What about the other baby? She whispered. Margaret's expression turned pained. That baby was abandoned at the hospital a few weeks later. No parents. No records. He was placed in foster care. Lisa's heart stopped. She knew the answer before she even spoke. Noah, she whispered. Margaret nodded. I don't know what Dr. Whitmore's intentions were. But he had no right to do what he did. And now, years later, you found the other boy. Lisa felt like she was going to be sick. Her son had a twin. A stolen twin. And the man who took him had gotten away with it. Tears blurred her vision. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a crime. Lisa took a shaky breath. Where is Dr. Whitmore now? Margaret hesitated, then stood up and walked to a bookshelf. She pulled out an old newspaper clipping and handed it to Lisa. Lisa's eyes scanned the faded article. Dr. Samuel Whitmore, former Hillside General Pediatrician, resides in retirement home outside city limits. Lisa clenched the paper in her fists. She knew what she had to do. She was going to find Dr. Whitmore. And she was going to make him tell the truth. Lisa sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had the address. Dr. Samuel Whitmore. The man who had stolen her son's twin. The man who had hidden a terrible secret for over a decade. She should have driven straight to the retirement home to confront him. But something held her back. Noah. Lisa glanced down at the newspaper article, then over at the school parking lot across the street. It was almost dismissal time. She had to talk to Karen first. Because no matter how much she wanted to tear apart the truth, one fact remained: Noah had only ever known Karen as his mother. A few hours later, Lisa pulled up outside Karen's house, her heart pounding. The door opened before she could even knock. Karen stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I had a feeling you'd show up. Lisa swallowed. We need to talk. Karen stepped aside, allowing her in. The house was small but warm, decorated with mismatched furniture and children's drawings pinned to the fridge. Noah's home. Lisa sat on the couch while Karen leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her carefully. Lisa took a deep breath. I found out the truth. Karen's jaw tightened. What truth? Lisa held up the newspaper clipping. Dr. Whitmore. I know what he did. Karen's eyes darkened, but she didn't react the way Lisa expected. She didn't look shocked. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she let out a slow breath and whispered, So you found out. Lisa's stomach dropped. You knew? Karen looked away. Not everything. But I had my suspicions. And I chose to leave it alone. Lisa's head spun. You knew Noah might have had another family? That he might have been stolen? Karen's voice cracked. I didn't know that. I just knew that the hospital called me one day, saying they had a baby in need of a home. No name. No past. Just a child abandoned in their care. Lisa's breath hitched. But he wasn't abandoned, Karen. He was taken. Karen closed her eyes. And what do you want me to do with that information, Lisa? Lisa stared at her. We need to fix this. We need to tell Noah. Karen's eyes flew open, filled with something between anger and fear. No. Absolutely not. Lisa was stunned. Why? Karen's voice trembled. Because Noah is happy. He has a life. A family. If you tell him the truth, you will rip him apart. Lisa's heart ached. She wasn't wrong. But she couldn't ignore this. I'm not trying to take him from you, Lisa whispered. But don't you think he deserves to know where he came from? Karen clenched her fists. And what happens after? What if he chooses to leave? What if I lose my son? Lisa softened. You won't lose him, Karen. We can do this together. But we have to do it right. Karen stared at her for a long moment, emotions warring on her face. Finally, she whispered, What are you planning to do? Lisa hesitated, then said, I'm going to see Dr. Whitmore. Karen's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but then she nodded. Lisa stood up. Will you come with me? Karen hesitated, then finally shook her head. Not yet. I need time. Lisa understood. But time was something she wasn't sure they had. Because Dr. Whitmore was the only one who could confirm the truth, and she had no idea how much longer he had left to do it. Lisa walked toward the door, pausing before she stepped out. She turned back. Karen? Karen looked up, her expression weary. Noah is my son's brother. No matter what happens, we're going to figure this out. Together. Karen's lips trembled. Then, finally, she nodded. Lisa stepped outside, her heart heavy. She had one more stop to make. It was time to face Dr. Whitmore. The retirement home sat on the edge of town, a quiet place surrounded by rustling oak trees and an old iron fence. Lisa sat in her car, staring at the entrance, trying to steady her nerves. Inside that building was the man who had stolen her son's brother. The man who had changed both their lives forever. She clenched the steering wheel. She wasn't leaving without the truth. The lobby smelled of disinfectant and warm vanilla, the scent of old furniture lingering in the air. A receptionist greeted her with a polite smile. Can I help you? Lisa's voice came out stronger than she expected. I'm here to see Dr. Samuel Whitmore. The receptionist's smile faltered. Dr. Whitmore doesn't get many visitors. Lisa forced a polite smile. Then I guess today is special. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Room 214. Down the hall, second door on the right. Lisa's heart pounded as she walked toward the room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, an elderly man sat in a recliner by the window, staring out at the trees. His once proud posture had softened with age, his shoulders hunched. Lisa knocked gently. Dr. Whitmore? The man didn't turn around. Who's asking? His voice was raspy, tired. Lisa stepped inside. My name is Lisa Carter. That got his attention. He turned slowly, his pale blue eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, there was silence. Then, recognition flashed across his face. You're Ethan's mother. Lisa's breath caught. He knew. She clenched her fists. And Noah's. Dr. Whitmore sighed, rubbing his temples. I was wondering when you'd come. Lisa's jaw tightened. So you admit it? You stole my son's twin? The old man's shoulders sagged. I didn't steal him. Lisa's voice trembled with anger. Then what do you call it? Dr. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. I lost my grandson in a car accident, he said quietly. He was just a baby. My daughter, she never forgave me for driving that night. She never spoke to me again. Lisa's breath hitched. Dr. Whitmore continued, his voice barely above a whisper. When I saw those two boys in the hospital, something inside me broke. I told myself I wasn't stealing. I was saving one of them. I convinced myself it was fate. Lisa's stomach churned. You didn't save him. You tore him away from his real family, she snapped. Dr. Whitmore's eyes darkened. And what would have happened if I hadn't? Lisa blinked. What? The old man leaned forward, his voice shaking. There was a hospital mistake that night. 2 newborns were left unattended in the maternity ward, yours and another woman's. When the staff found them missing, they panicked. They switched records to cover it up. Lisa's head spun. What are you saying? Dr. Whitmore exhaled heavily. I took Noah that night. But when I couldn't go through with it, I returned him. Only. I didn't know the hospital had already made an error. They gave him to the wrong family. Lisa felt like the room was closing in around her. She clutched the chair beside her to steady herself. Noah hadn't just been stolen. He had been lost. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. So you just left him? You let another family raise him? Dr. Whitmore's eyes glistened. By the time I realized the mistake, it was too late. I was a coward. I couldn't face what I had done. Lisa's body trembled. Do you know who his real parents are? Dr. Whitmore looked away. I tried to find out, he admitted. But the hospital buried the records. And then, Noah was abandoned, passed into foster care. I knew I had ruined everything. Lisa swallowed the lump in her throat. This wasn't just about her. Somewhere out there, another family had lost their child that night. And Noah was caught in the middle. Lisa's hands curled into fists. You don't get to sit here and feel sorry for yourself, she said, her voice shaking. You destroyed lives. Dr. Whitmore closed his eyes. I know. Lisa took a deep, shaky breath. She had what she came for. The truth. But it only led to more questions. Noah wasn't her biological son. But he was Ethan's twin. And now, she had to find out where he truly belonged. She turned toward the door. Wait. Lisa stopped. Dr. Whitmore's voice was weak now. You'll tell him, won't you? Lisa's fingers tightened on the doorknob. She didn't turn around. He deserves to know, she said softly. Then she walked out. Lisa sat in her car outside the retirement home, staring blankly at the road ahead. Her fingers trembled against the steering wheel. Noah wasn't hers. The words rang in her ears like an echo she couldn't shake. She had spent 10 years raising Ethan, believing him to be her only son. But now, she knew the truth. He had a twin, a brother who had been lost, misplaced, and abandoned because of a hospital cover-up and a desperate old man's mistake. And somewhere out there, another family had been waiting for a baby that never came home. Lisa's breath hitched. She had to find them. She reached for her phone and dialed. Karen. There was a brief silence before Karen sighed. I knew you'd call. Lisa swallowed. I know the truth. About Noah. About everything. Karen's voice was quiet. What do we do now? Lisa gripped the phone tighter. We find his real family. That night, Lisa sat at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of paper, old hospital records, and legal documents she had begged and borrowed to obtain. But it wasn't enough. The records were sealed, altered, buried. Whoever had covered up the mistake all those years ago had done it thoroughly. Lisa ran a hand through her hair, exhausted. There had to be a way. Then, her eyes flickered to a yellowed patient ledger she had taken from the hospital archives. She had almost skipped over it before. Now, she ran her fingers over the page, scanning the list of deliveries from that night. There were 2 unnamed boys. One was marked as reunited with mother. The other had a simple note beside it. Transferred to foster care, awaiting guardian. Lisa's breath caught. She traced the entry across the page, following the barely legible ink scrawled beside it. A doctor's signature. Not Whitmore's. Another name. Dr. Evan Mitchell. Lisa's heart pounded. This was the missing piece. Who was Dr. Mitchell? And why had he been involved? She grabbed her laptop and searched. Dr. Evan Mitchell, former Hillside General Hospital pediatrician. Lisa's pulse quickened. He had been a neonatal specialist. And he had worked at the hospital the night Ethan and Noah were born. But there was more. Lisa scrolled further, her eyes widening. Dr. Evan Mitchell, deceased, car accident, 10 years ago. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. Another doctor who had been at the center of the cover-up. And now, he was gone. But just as she was about to close the page, something else caught her eye. A surviving family member. Dr. Evan Mitchell is survived by his wife, Rebecca Mitchell, and their son, James Mitchell. Lisa's heart stopped. Rebecca Mitchell. She knew that name. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking, and pulled up Karen's foster records. Her stomach dropped. Noah had been placed in foster care through a private agency. An agency that had been funded by Rebecca Mitchell. Lisa's breath came in short gasps. Rebecca Mitchell, the wife of the doctor involved in the cover-up, had been involved in the foster care system that placed Noah with Karen. Had she known? Had she been trying to hide him? Lisa's hands clenched into fists. She had one more stop to make. She was going to find Rebecca Mitchell. And she was going to uncover the final piece of the truth. The Grand White House sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by a well-manicured lawn and a tall iron gate. It was the kind of place that exuded old money, the kind of home where secrets stayed buried behind pristine walls. Lisa parked across the street, staring at the gold nameplate beside the front door. Rebecca Mitchell. The widow of Dr. Evan Mitchell. The woman whose name was tied to Noah's past. Lisa's hands trembled as she stepped out of the car. This was it, the final door standing between her and the truth. She rang the doorbell. A few seconds passed. Then, the door cracked open, revealing a woman in her late 50s. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, her sharp blue eyes scanning Lisa with thinly veiled suspicion. "Can I help you?" Lisa took a steadying breath. "Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Lisa Carter. I need to talk to you about my son." Rebecca's expression didn't change. "I don't know you." Lisa clenched her jaw. "But you know Noah." For a split second, Lisa saw it, a flicker of recognition. Then, just as quickly, Rebecca's face hardened. "I think you should leave." Lisa stepped forward, her voice unwavering. "Dr. Whitmore told me everything. About the hospital cover-up. About the missing records. About how 2 babies disappeared from the maternity ward the night my son was born." Rebecca's fingers twitched against the doorframe. Lisa pressed on. "Your husband's name is all over the records. And I just found out that you funded the foster care system that placed Noah with Karen." Rebecca inhaled sharply but said nothing. Lisa's heart pounded. "Tell me the truth. Did you know who Noah was?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Rebecca sighed. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in." The living room was as pristine as the outside, elegant but cold. Rebecca sat in an armchair, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Lisa sat across from her, gripping the edge of the couch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rebecca broke the silence. "You were never supposed to find out." Lisa's chest tightened. "So you did know?" Rebecca's lips pressed together. "Not at first. But my husband, he came home that night, different." Lisa leaned in. "What do you mean?" Rebecca's gaze grew distant, as if she were reliving the past. "He didn't sleep. He barely spoke. Then, one night, he broke down and told me, something happened at the hospital. A mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake." Lisa's hands curled into fists. "A mistake that cost me my son's twin." Rebecca's voice shook. Evan wasn't a bad man. But when he realized what had happened, it was too late. The hospital had covered its tracks. If he exposed the truth, his career, his life, would have been over. Lisa's stomach churned. "So he stayed quiet." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. But the guilt ate at him. He tried to find the boy, the one who had been lost in the system. He wanted to make it right. Lisa's breath hitched. "And that's why you funded the foster care agency?" Rebecca's eyes glistened. It was the only thing he could do. He pulled strings, kept an eye on Noah from a distance. When he found out he had been placed with Karen, he stopped looking. He told himself that Noah was safe. Lisa swallowed hard. But he wasn't. He grew up without knowing the truth. Rebecca's voice cracked. "And then Evan died. And I was left holding a secret I didn't know how to fix." Lisa exhaled shakily. "So you buried it?" Rebecca closed her eyes. "I told myself it was better this way. That some truths do more harm than good." Lisa's heart pounded. "But it's not better. Noah deserves to know who he is." Rebecca looked away. "And what if it destroys him?" Lisa's voice softened. "Or what if it sets him free?" Rebecca was silent. Then, finally, she stood up and walked to an antique wooden desk. She pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and handed it to Lisa. Lisa frowned, flipping it open. Inside, pages were filled with handwritten notes, hospital memos, and a single photograph. Lisa's breath caught. It was a picture of two newborns. Side by side in a hospital bassinet. Lisa traced her fingers over the image, her chest tightening. Ethan and Noah. Together, before the world pulled them apart. Tears burned in her eyes. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "Do what you think is right." Lisa closed the notebook, gripping it tightly. She already knew what she had to do. She was going to tell Noah. And she was going to bring her son's brother home. Lisa sat in her car, the small leather-bound notebook clutched in her hands. The photo of Ethan and Noah as newborns stared back at her, the final proof of a truth that had been hidden for a decade. She had spent days thinking about this moment. Would Noah be angry? Would he feel betrayed? Would he even want to know the truth? But one thought kept pushing her forward: he deserved to know. No more secrets. She glanced at the clock. It was almost time. She exhaled deeply, then stepped out of the car. It was time to tell Noah who he really was. Karen's house was quiet when Lisa knocked. A few seconds later, the door creaked open. Karen's face was unreadable. "You're sure about this?" she asked softly. Lisa nodded. Karen sighed, stepping aside. "He's in his room." Lisa's heart pounded as she walked down the hallway, stopping in front of the slightly ajar door. Inside, Noah sat on the floor, flipping through a comic book. He looked up when he saw her. "Oh, hey, Mrs. Carter." Lisa's throat tightened. He had no idea how much she already cared for him. She forced a small smile. "Hey, Noah. Do you have a minute? There's something important I need to tell you." Noah shrugged. "Sure." Lisa sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the notebook tightly. She took a breath. "What I'm about to tell you, it's going to change everything you thought you knew about yourself." Noah blinked, lowering the comic book. "Okay, Lisa's voice was gentle. "Do you remember when you first met Ethan? How you guys looked alike?" Noah grinned. "Yeah, that was pretty wild. We could totally be brothers." Lisa's chest ached. "You are brothers, Noah." The grin faded from his face. "Wait, what?" Lisa hesitated, then handed him the old photograph. Noah frowned, studying it. "Who are these babies?" Lisa swallowed hard. "That's you and Ethan. When you were born." Noah's fingers tightened around the photo. But I don't have a brother." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "You do. And you were separated when you were babies. Because of a terrible mistake." Noah stared at the picture, his breath shaky. "How?" His voice was barely a whisper. Lisa took a deep breath and told him everything. The hospital mix-up. The disappearance. The cover-up. Dr. Whitmore. Dr. Mitchell. Rebecca. Everything. When she finished, the room was silent. Noah was staring down at the photograph, his expression unreadable. Then, he whispered, "Ethan's my twin." Lisa nodded. Tears welled in his eyes. "And you're his mom." Lisa felt her chest tighten. "Yes. But that doesn't mean Karen isn't your mom too. She raised you. She loves you." Noah blinked rapidly, like he was trying to process too much at once. "So, what now?" Lisa hesitated. "That's up to you, Noah." He swallowed hard. Do I tell Ethan?" Lisa gave him a soft smile. "That's your choice. But I know he would want to know." Noah looked down at the picture again, his fingers tracing the image of two tiny babies who should have never been apart. Then, his jaw set. "I want to tell him." Ethan was waiting outside when Noah stepped onto the porch. Lisa and Karen stood back, watching as Noah walked up to his brother. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Noah took a deep breath. "Dude. I have something crazy to tell you." Ethan tilted his head. "Okay." Noah held up the photograph. Ethan squinted at it. "Who are those babies?" Noah took a shaky breath. "Us." Ethan frowned. "Wait, what?" Noah's voice cracked. "We're twins, Ethan. You're my brother." Silence. Then Ethan's mouth dropped open. "You're joking." Noah shook his head. Ethan stared at him. "No way." Noah nodded. "Way." Ethan blinked. Then, suddenly, he grinned. "Dude. This is awesome." Lisa let out a choked laugh, tears streaming down her face. Noah stared at Ethan like he wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. "You're not mad?" Ethan scoffed. "Why would I be mad? I literally got a brother overnight. This is, like, the best thing ever." Noah let out a breathless laugh. "I mean, yeah. It kinda is." Ethan punched him lightly on the shoulder. "Took you long enough to tell me." Noah chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah. Sorry about that." Ethan grinned. "You're forgiven, bro." Lisa's heart swelled as the two boys hugged for the first time, knowing exactly who they were to each other. It had taken 10 years to fix a mistake that should have never happened. But now, they had found each other. And no one could ever take that away from them again. Family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you, no matter what. And sometimes, even when the odds seem impossible, the truth finds its way home.